Oh, hello. Welcome back. My name is Brian Taylor with the North-South Rivers Watershed Association. Thanks for joining us again. In the last episode, we talked about water at the surface and water across the land. Well, today we're going to be talking about water beneath the surface, water that is underground. So come join us and let's dig into water beneath our feet. So today we're going to talk about groundwater, what's going on underground, and also how we can have an impact on the quality of our groundwater. All right, everyone, take a moment and hold perfectly still, all right? You can still breathe, but very carefully. Do you feel that? Do you feel water underneath you right now? I don't. But believe it or not, there is water underneath your feet right now, and it's called groundwater, all right? That's one word, groundwater. And there's actually a lot of it, and it's actually pretty important. What? You might exclaim with confusion and disbelief? Water underground? Well, yes, it's true. It's groundwater under there. According to the USGS, 1.7% of all Earth's water is underground. And about 1/3 of all Earth's fresh water occurs underground as well. That's 1/3 of all fresh water. That's a lot. Remember fresh water? Remember that time you used fresh water? Remember that time you were running so hard and got super thirsty that you needed some fresh water? Remember that time that fresh water was so important that without it, all life on Earth would cease to exist as we know it? Yeah, I remember that too. So I have a model that will help us understand what's going on beneath our feet. So let's take a look at what the underground looks like. All right, here we are, and here we've got our model right here. So just like we talked about a moment ago, this is a model of what is going on beneath our feet, okay? So all those things that we just mentioned, all that sand, all that rock, all that soil, everything below us right now is all represented here. So in this model, you're gonna have to imagine that us people, we're all standing up here. This is where we're doing our thing, you know, and this is what is underneath us in the earth right now. So take a close look and see what you see. Under here, we've got some rock, we've got some layers of sand, we've got some gravel, there's some layers of clay. That's all what's going on underneath you right now. And just like what we talked about last week, there's also some surface waters going on here, like we've got a lake right here, all right? We also have these wells, which are where we drill down underground to capture the water that's going on there. So take a close look, all right? Besides all that rock and all that sand and all that gravel, do you see water underneath there right now? Take a close look and see. It might be hard to tell that there is water underneath there, all right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a little bit of dye to this model to help us visualize the water that is under there and also what the water is doing. So let's take a moment and watch that blue dye for a second. What's it doing? What do you notice? You can see that it's going out in all directions because in and amongst all that sand and rock is that water. That water is permeated through all that sand and all that material that's underground. And also, all that water in and amongst all that sand and rock, that's called saturation. That water, that groundwater has saturated amongst all that sediment down there. So now that we've added that to our system, take a moment and watch and let's see what that water and what that dye is doing. So, as you can see, that dye is not staying in one place. Can you see it move? It's actually moving quite a bit. And this is what's happening in real life. Not only is there water underneath us called groundwater, but that groundwater is moving. Want to know why it's moving? Well, think about it. What do you think? What makes water move? The same thing that makes this do this. Gravity. Gravity is what is making water move at the surface, and it's gravity is what makes water move beneath the surface. So think about this. Not only is there water beneath us called groundwater, but also that groundwater is moving. It's moving because of gravity. All right, so now that we've given it a moment for that dye to work its way through our system, you can see that the dye, which is traveling in and amongst the water, rode right across that layer of clay. In this model, it's labeled as the aquitard. which is basically a layer of clay that separates two aquifers. And aquifers are areas where there is lots of groundwater. And this layer of clay separates those two aquifers, okay? And so the reason why clay interacts differently is that water interacts differently with all types of different sediment, okay? So imagine if you have a handful of rock and you pour water onto that rock, that water is going to easily flow in and around that rock or that stone or gravel. If you have a handful of sand and you pour water on that handful of sand, that water might take a little bit longer to work its way through that sand. But if you have a handful of clay and you pour water onto it, it's going to take a long time, or that water might not even be able to work its way through the clay. And that's because the sediment that is in clay is so close together, okay? We call that percolation, okay? When things percolate through, it can take longer and different amounts of time for things to percolate through different types of material. And that's what's going on in this model. So the water very easily goes through rock and gravel. It takes a little bit longer to go through sand, but it can almost not go through things like clay. So now that we've seen that there is water underground, now that we see that that water moves, what might be some things that can happen to this water that can cause some issues, okay? So in this model, we have a couple things going on here that are man-made. We've got something called a septic tank, all right? You might have heard of a septic tank before. You might actually even have a septic tank at your house right now. It's where your wastewater goes, okay? Ask your parents whether you have a septic tank or you're on a municipal sewer system, okay? And then we also have something called a UST. Any guesses what that stands for? UST? Well, I'll let you know. UST stands for underground storage tank, okay? Gas stations use underground storage tanks to store their gas. They keep it safe, it's underground, and it's where they store different types of chemicals like gasoline. So these two systems can house some pretty disgusting and bad stuff, all right? With these two things, sometimes, unfortunately, they may not work. They might start to malfunction. They might start to leak. What do you think might happen to our groundwater if we have a leaky septic tank or a leaky underground storage tank? What do you think might happen? Well, for this model, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a different color dye to the septic tank and the underground storage tank, and we're going to see what happens when those different types of chemicals, or in this case, when those types of pollutants enter our groundwater. So I'm going to put this dye into this pipette, and we're going to add it to our systems now. So now that we've added this dye, take a moment. What do you notice is happening? As we can see, that pollution has entered our groundwater, and you can see it starting to move. Just like we saw, our groundwater is actually moving because of the blue dye added. Now you can see that not only is the water itself moving, but also it carries pollution with it. So just like how we saw in last week's episode, how water could move across the land and pick up all that gross stuff that we don't want it to, that also happens underground. You can see that when we add pollutants to our groundwater, that groundwater will take it and move it along to different places. So, as we can see, not only has the pollution entered our groundwater near some of our wells where we actually take water up to survive off of, but also that pollution has entered places like the lake, okay? That septic tank could be someone who lives near the lake, or that gas station could be nearby a lake or a pond or a river, but you can see that all the water underneath is still connected, all right? And actually, believe it or not, now that we can see that the lake has been affected with pollution, not only does the pollution affect groundwater supplies, it also affects surface water. With that, we can see that the surface water is connected to groundwater. If we have polluted groundwater, we have polluted surface water. If we have polluted surface water, we have polluted groundwater. This lake or that pond might be where we want to go fishing. It might be one where we want to go swimming. But who wants to go swimming when we have a leaky septic tank nearby, or when we have a leaky gas station underground storage tank nearby? We can see that how our actions at the surface or underground can affect all the water, because all this water, it is all connected. All right, so with this model, we've learned about groundwater, we've seen groundwater move, and we've seen how our actions above ground can affect the quality of both our surface water and our groundwater, because it's all connected. Okay, so now that we've discovered groundwater and we've seen what can happen to it, think of some ways you can help protect one of our most valuable resources. Remember, just because the water is beneath our feet doesn't mean we can't leave a footprint on it. My name is Brian Taylor with the North South Rivers Watershed Association. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.